Hi there, I'm Christine Weber. Thank you so much for joining me for my weekly live stream. I'm usually here on Wednesdays at 11. Hey, I have two cameras going, so I might be looking up sometimes or looking at that one. So I haven't figured out how to just do one camera when I do my live stream. So thank you for your patience. And welcome. It's nice to have you here. Today I'm going to be talking about some terminology and how we can do a better job of using it in the yoga world. So the reason I'm live streaming about this today, and you might have seen in the description, I'm going to be talking about the terms contralateral and cross-lateral and bilateral. The reason I'm talking about this is because I myself have made some mistakes using the terminology, and I want to clarify it. And if you're a yoga teacher, my whole thing is like supporting yoga teachers and supporting yoga teachers and understanding the mechanisms that underlie our wonderful practices. So, I don't necessarily suppose that we can understand all the mechanisms, but I think to understand them a little bit is really helpful, and to be able to explain that to our students is really helpful. So that's something that I've been doing for like 12 years. I've been teaching for almost 30 years, but I've been really, it's more than 12 years, more like 14 years. I've been really into understanding the science behind these practices. So I want to apologize if I have said anything that has been wrong in the past around this idea of contralateral, and I want to clear up the confusion because I recently cleared it up for myself, and I want to share with you what the issues are and what the challenges are with using these terms. As a movement professional, I tend to use the terms in more of a sports movement realm field, But I also study a lot of psychology and psychotherapy and how movement affects psychology, how it affects mental health. And because of that, a lot of that literature is more neurology based. So these terms can be used, they're used in different disciplines, but they're used differently. And so one of the things I've been doing is conflating the usage, and I want to apologize for that. So and I already did that, so I'm not going to over apologize, but let me explain what I'm talking about. Okay. So for example, what you'll see a lot you'll see me talk about a lot are contralateral movements, right arm, left leg kind of stuff, right? These are contralateral movements I'm doing right now. And I use these a lot, and I do them in different poses, like warrior one pose, or a lunge. I'll do contralateral movements. So contralateral movement is fantastic for the brain. Like it's what we do, to walk down the road, that's contralateral. So human beings are really contralateral, and it's a really good thing to practice. Why is it a good thing to practice? Because it's very supportive for focus and attention. It's very supportive when folks have depression, for example, because oftentimes there's a lack of focus and attention. Of course, it's good for things like ADHD too, but can be really supportive for folks with depression, with mental health challenges, right? So that term contralateral is accurate in the movement sciences. And I do it all the time. I teach it all the time. And I backed up because I wanted to show you some other things, but like from a lunge, right? So as my right knee is lunging, my left arm is going up. That's a good contralateral movement. If I was doing, let's see, like you could do warrior one that way. And you could also be doing like something like warrior three and playing around with your arms. I teach stuff like that a lot. And like from child's pose, you can come up from child's pose and do right arm, left leg in a tiger stretch, and then left arm, right leg, or right arm, left leg, right? So those are all examples, and I'm super into it. Like I use it in many, many of my classes, in my manuals, in the teaching I do at the Mountain Area Health Education Center, where I work with healthcare professionals. I love it. I love it. And it's very balancing for the mind. It's very focusing, and it helps to promote attention. Okay, so that's contralateral in the movement sciences. Now, here's where it gets confusing. Some people also call that cross-lateral. That's not not uncommon to see that kind of movement cross-lateral. The way that I have learned the term and the way I use the term for cross-lateral is this. So when you cross the midline, for example, in a twist, that is a cross. I use the term cross-lateral. When you do eagle pose, right? That's cross-lateral again. And that has a different effect. Crossing the midline has a different effect than contralateral in terms of the way it affects the brain and the nervous system. Nevertheless, it's still great, because in general, what you're doing is like coming up with creative, interesting ways to make the hemispheres communicate better. That's what contralateral is about. And it increases movement vocabulary, increases your feeling of easefulness in your body and safety in your body, improves proprioception, can help improve interoception if you're using awareness. So like it has numerous benefits. Now, in neurology, if you take one arm up or one leg out to the side, that's called contralateral. That's neurology. So I was messing that up in my head. I was like, no, that's not contralateral because you're not using the arm, but it is in a different discipline. In neurology, it means that I'm stimulating the opposite hemisphere by lifting this. It's stimulating sensory motor cortex and going through the thalamus. Stimulation, right? And what happens is the corpus callosum has to inhibit the neurons on the other side of the brain. It has to inhibit. So one of the things you may have heard me say is that the corpus callosum is inhibitory. Where I was getting it confused was I kept saying it was inhibitory because I thought it meant the autonomic nervous system, which is a term that's used in psychotherapy, right? To inhibit the sympathetic activation of the autonomic nervous system. So I was confusing those two things. And I may have confused that for you. And I apologize if I did so. But the idea now I want to be really clear about is that, yes, it's when you lift your right arm, there has to be inhibition and the corpus callosum is doing that. But that doesn't mean that it has an inhibitory effect in the autonomic nervous system. It's actually maybe a little excitatory. And the reason is because contralateral movements make you think, you got to pay attention, you have to focus, right? And that's good, right? But it has a different effect on the nervous system. So I apologize for conflating that stuff. Okay, I'm going to stop that. I'm such a woman. I keep apologizing. Okay. I'm trying to clarify. I hope it's clarified. Okay, then there was one other thing. Oh, and here's the other thing I wanted to talk about. So if you are familiar with any of the therapies like EMDR or brain spotting, and they probably use it in things like sensory motor psychotherapy and somatic experiencing too. One of the things that's used a lot is they call it bilateral stimulation. Now, this term confuses me because in the movement world, this would be bilateral. You're using both arms, right? It would be, that sounds more like bilateral to me, right? But in the EMDR world, in the psychotherapy world, where they are doing different techniques, using different techniques to create an effect on the brain, bilateral stimulation means taking your eyes one side to the other or listening to sounds bilateral. Some of you might know you can put on headphones and get bilateral beats, like bilateral music, right? That goes back and forth between your ears. It's bilateral stimulation. But it's neurologic, right? It's not movement. But here's where it gets confusing. Even this is bilateral stimulation, and it's used in different therapies to help integrate traumatic experiences and create greater neurobiologic balance. So it's a neurology term, not a movement science, sports, physical therapy term in that sense. So again, discovering all this has been really clarifying for me because I've just been I've been confusing the whole thing because as a movement expert who is interested in psychotherapy, I read the literature from all over the place. And then I see like, and then I start, unfortunately, I was confusing it. So I needed to get all those terms out of the table to feel better about how to use them when I teach. And so bilateral stimulation is fantastic for the brain. And we do it all the time in yoga. I do, like lying on your back, inhale one arm up. If you're doing bridge pose, exhale down, inhale the other arm up. That's bilateral stimulation, but it's not bilateral movement. And so, just getting clearer about these terms, I think, is really helpful for understanding the mechanisms. I feel like you have to watch this video more than once. The other issue that happens is that in the movement sciences and the movement world, people will use the terms differently. And I kind of touched on that a little bit, but some people will say cross-lateral when they mean contralateral. Some people, well, the way that I describe it. So contralateral is this, cross-lateral is this, right? So some people will use those terms interchangeably. Some people will use them opposite. And then some people will just use the term cross crawl, and it means everything. And you see that especially like in the brain gym, people in the childhood development stuff, you see people using the term cross-lateral, and it just means anytime you're doing anything with your opposite arm and leg, whether or not you're going over the midline or not. Are you more confused? I hope it's clearer now. And again, you may have to watch this a couple of times, but just to summarize, the main point here is that in the movement field, the words cross-lateral, contralateral, cross-crawl, bilateral are used differently than they're used in the neuroscience field. And getting clearer about those differences can be very helpful for you in understanding the mechanisms behind how yoga practices work. So I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear your comments. So feel free to leave some comments and questions too, and other things you'd like me to talk about in my live streams. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Take care.